The Void Crisis. The Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council fell silent as the holographic projection flickered to life. Zixthor, the council leader and eldest member of the Velcron species, stood before the gathered delegates with his forearms crossed against his crystalline chest. His bioluminescent patterns dimmed to a dark purple, a color that all present recognized as deep concern. The projection showed something that had become terrifyingly familiar over the past 6 cycles. Another star system consumed by the spreading darkness they had come to call the Void Storms. Commander Quenva of the Draknor Empire shifted her massive scaled form in her gravity chair, her 3 eyes narrowing as she watched the recordings. The star system in question had housed over 40 billion souls across 7 inhabited worlds, just 3 standard days ago. Now there was nothing but an expanding sphere of absolute darkness that seemed to devour light itself. Ships that ventured too close simply vanished from all sensors, never to be heard from again. Even their distress signals cut off instantly, as if they had been erased from existence. The assembly chamber, a magnificent structure that floated in the void between dimensions, had been built to house representatives from over 300 species. Today, barely 200 remained. The rest had either been consumed by the void storms or had retreated to their home systems in desperate attempts to protect what remained of their civilizations. The great experiment of galactic unity that had taken 10,000 years to build was crumbling in a matter of months. Chief Scientist Relmik, a being of pure energy contained within a sophisticated magnetic field, pulsed with frustration as he presented his latest findings. His species, the Lumini, had been considered the most intellectually advanced in the known galaxy for over 1 million years. They had cracked the secrets of dimensional travel, mastered the manipulation of space-time itself, and created weapons that could crack planets. Yet none of their considerable knowledge seemed to make any difference against this threat. The scientist's voice resonated through the chamber, translated instantly into the primary languages of all present. He explained that the void storms appeared to be composed of some form of exotic matter that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. They consumed everything they touched, converting matter and energy into more of themselves. The storms were spreading exponentially, and their projections showed that at the current rate, the entire galaxy would be consumed within 2 standard years. Desperate measures had already been attempted. The Velcron had deployed their reality anchors, massive devices that could stabilize the fabric of spacetime across entire sectors. The storms had consumed them without pause. The Draknor had unleashed their most powerful weapons, antimatter warheads capable of destroying entire moons. The explosions had simply been absorbed, making the storms grow faster. The Lumini had tried to create dimensional barriers, attempting to quarantine the affected regions. The void had simply expanded through other dimensions they had not even known existed. Every solution proposed by the galaxy's greatest minds had failed. Every technology, no matter how advanced, proved useless. The Council had reached a point of desperation that bordered on panic. Species that had been allies for millennia were beginning to turn on each other, searching for someone to blame. Ancient rivalries were resurfacing, and there was talk of abandoning the outer sectors entirely, leaving billions to their fate in a futile attempt to buy time for the core worlds. It was during this darkest moment that Zixthor made an announcement that shocked the assembly into stunned silence. He proposed contacting the humans. The reaction was immediate and loud. Humans were barely a Tier 2 civilization, having only achieved faster-than-light travel within the last century. They had been discovered by a Velcron exploration vessel just 50 years prior, existing in a remote spiral arm that most species considered barely worth exploring. Their technology was primitive, their understanding of advanced physics laughable by galactic standards, and their society was still struggling with basic concepts like planetary unity. Quenva rose to her full intimidating height, her voice booming across the chamber in protest. She reminded the Council that humans still used kinetic weapons in their conflicts. They powered their ships with crude fusion reactors when the rest of the galaxy had moved to zero-point energy extraction millennia ago. They had not even mastered artificial gravity properly, relying on rotation to simulate it in their habitats. What could such a primitive species possibly offer when the combined might and knowledge of 300 advanced civilizations had proven insufficient? But Relmik surprised everyone by supporting Zixthor's proposal. The Lumini scientist had been quietly studying humanity since their discovery, fascinated by certain anomalies in their development. He explained that humans possessed something unique, something that no other species in the galactic database exhibited to the same degree. They had a peculiar approach to problem-solving that defied conventional logic. Where other species would apply known principles and established theories, humans seemed to thrive on unconventional thinking. They called it creativity, intuition, or sometimes simply desperation. The scientist presented examples. Human history was filled with instances where they had overcome impossible odds through methods that made no logical sense until they worked. They had left their planet using chemical rockets when they barely understood the physics involved. They had split the atom before they had computers. They had survived multiple extinction-level events on their home world through sheer stubborn refusal to give up. Most remarkably, they had repeatedly brought themselves to the brink of self-annihilation through warfare, yet somehow always managed to step back and choose survival. The debate raged for hours. Conservative delegates argued that involving humans would be a waste of precious time. Progressive voices countered that conventional approaches had already failed, and perhaps an unconventional species was exactly what they needed. In the end, desperation won, with the void storms consuming another 2 systems during their deliberations. The Council voted narrowly to extend an emergency invitation to humanity. The human response arrived within days, far faster than anyone expected. A small fleet of 5 vessels emerged from faster-than-light transit at the designated coordinates. The ships themselves were almost comical by galactic standards, blocky and inelegant, held together with what appeared to be welded metal plates. They moved with the grace of thrown bricks, their chemical thrusters leaving trails of exhaust that more advanced species had eliminated from their designs thousands of years ago. Captain Sarah Chen commanded the lead vessel, a heavy cruiser that humans had optimistically named Indomitable Spirit. She was a compact woman with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, her eyes sharp and observant. Beside her stood Dr. Marcus Webb, a theoretical physicist who looked uncomfortable in his hastily issued military uniform, and Ambassador James Okonkwo, a diplomat who had spent the last decade trying to establish formal relations with the Galactic Council. The human delegation was escorted to the Grand Assembly Hall with a mixture of curiosity and barely concealed skepticism from their guides. When they entered the chamber, even the humans could not hide their awe at the sight of hundreds of alien species gathered in one place. Yet Sarah noticed something else in their faces: fear, exhaustion, and the hollow look of people who had watched their worlds burn. Zixthor presented the situation to the humans with complete transparency. He showed them the progression of the void storms, explained the failed attempts to stop them, and made clear that the galaxy was facing extinction. He did not sugarcoat the Council's desperation or the fact that many members considered contacting humanity a sign of how low they had fallen. The Council leader's bioluminescent patterns flickered between purple and deep blue as he finished his briefing, colors that conveyed both sorrow and a faint glimmer of hope. The human delegation listened in silence, their expressions growing more serious as they absorbed the magnitude of the crisis. Dr. Webb asked for copies of all research data, which Relmick provided immediately, though the Lumini scientist doubted the human would be able to process information that had taken his own civilization centuries to accumulate. Ambassador Okonkwo requested permission to send detailed reports back to Earth, which was granted. Captain Chen simply studied the holographic displays with an intensity that made several delegates uncomfortable. Then Quenva, perhaps seeking to humble the humans or simply out of frustration, demanded to know what their primitive civilization could possibly offer. She gestured at the displays showing the void storms and challenged them to provide even one theory that the galaxy's greatest minds had not already considered and tested. Her tone made it clear she expected nothing useful from these newcomers. What happened next would become legendary in the annals of galactic history. Captain Chen stepped forward, her eyes still fixed on the holographic projection of a void storm. She asked a question so simple, so basic, that half the delegates thought she was joking. She wanted to know if anyone had tried simply talking to it. The chamber erupted in confused murmuring. Relmick explained patiently that the void storm showed no signs of consciousness, no pattern that suggested intelligence, no response to any form of communication they had attempted. But Sarah Chen persisted. She pointed out that every attempt so far had been aggressive, trying to contain it, destroy it, or push it back. Every response had been from a position of force, treating the phenomenon as an enemy to be defeated. She asked if anyone had considered that the void might be responding to aggression with aggression. What if, she suggested, they tried approaching it peacefully, without weapons, without shields, without any show of force? The chamber fell into stunned silence. Then the laughter began. It started with nervous chuckles and grew into open mockery. The idea was absurd. The reasoning of primitives who did not understand the nature of the threat. Quenva declared it the most ridiculous suggestion she had heard in her 3 centuries of life. How could peace and goodwill stop something that devoured entire star systems? It was like trying to negotiate with a supernova or reason with a black hole. But as the laughter died down, Zixthor raised one of his 4 hands for silence. The ancient being studied the human captain with his multifaceted eyes, seeing something in her expression that others had missed. He asked Sarah a direct question. Did humanity truly believe this approach could work? The captain met his gaze without flinching. She admitted she had no certainty, no proof, no scientific backing for her theory, but she pointed out that everything else had failed. And sometimes the most illogical answer was the right one, simply because no one had been desperate or crazy enough to try it. Dr. Webb stepped forward to support his captain, his earlier nervousness replaced by growing excitement. He had been reviewing the data Relmic provided, and he had noticed something. Every time the Void Storms encountered a new technology or weapon, they adapted and grew stronger. It was almost as if they were feeding on the complexity and aggression of the responses. Human history, he explained, had taught them a hard lesson. Sometimes the only way to stop a cycle of violence was to refuse to participate in it. Ambassador Okonkwo added that humanity had nearly destroyed itself multiple times through war and aggression. They had developed weapons capable of rendering their planet uninhabitable. They had stood on the brink of extinction by their own hand. What had saved them ultimately was not superior weapons or more advanced technology. It was the choice to lower their weapons first, to extend a hand instead of a fist, to try understanding before resorting to force. The council chamber descended into heated debate once more. Some delegates saw the human proposal as their last hope. Others viewed it as suicide, sending people into the void without any protection. Quenva argued that if the approach failed, they would lose the human delegation and valuable ships that could be used for evacuation efforts. But Relmic countered that they had nothing left to lose. The galaxy was dying, and conventional wisdom had brought them nothing but failure. In the end, it was Captain Chen who made the decision. She stated simply that her crew had volunteered for this mission knowing the risks. They had come to help, and they would try their solution regardless of the Council's approval. If they failed, the galaxy would be no worse off than it already was. If they succeeded, even partially, it might buy time to find other solutions. Ambassador Okonkwo formally requested permission to attempt their approach, making it clear that humanity took full responsibility for the outcome. Zixthor granted permission, his bioluminescent patterns showing colors that no one in the chamber could quite interpret. The human delegation was escorted back to their ships and provided with coordinates to the nearest void storm, a relatively small one that had emerged just days ago near an evacuated mining colony. As the human vessels prepared to depart, word spread through the Grand Assembly Hall and beyond. Some species offered prayers to their various deities. Others began placing bets on how long the humans would survive. A few, very few, allowed themselves to hope. The 5 human ships moved away from the dimensional station, their crude engines pushing them toward what everyone else in the galaxy had learned to fear and flee from. Inside the indomitable spirit, Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge surrounded by her crew. She looked at each of them in turn, seeing fear but also determination in their eyes. They were about to do something that every piece of conventional wisdom said was impossible. They were going to approach the apocalypse unarmed and hope that humanity's greatest strength, the ability to choose peace even in the face of annihilation, would be enough. As the darkness of the void storm grew larger on their view screens, filling the forward displays with absolute blackness that seemed to swallow the stars themselves, Sarah gave the order that would change the fate of the galaxy. She commanded all weapon systems to be powered down, all shields to be dropped, and all aggressive postures to be abandoned. They would enter the void as they had come into the galaxy, small, vulnerable, but unbroken in spirit. The human solution, the bridge of the indomitable spirit, hummed with quiet tension as the 5 human vessels approached the edge of the void storm. Behind them, at a safe distance, a dozen observation ships from various Galactic Council species watched with sensors recording every moment. Most expected to witness a disaster. A few harbored a desperate hope that bordered on prayer. None truly believed the humans would survive the next hour. Captain Sarah Chen stood at the center of the bridge, her hands resting calmly on the command console. Around her, the crew worked with practiced efficiency, though she could see the slight tremor in their movements. They were afraid. She was afraid, but fear had never stopped humanity before, and it would not stop them now. On the main view screen, the void storm appeared as a sphere of absolute darkness, roughly the size of Earth's moon, its edges crackling with energy that sensors could barely register. Dr. Marcus Webb moved between stations, checking readings and muttering calculations under his breath. He had spent the journey from the council station reviewing decades of human research into consciousness, meditation, and the measurable effects of focused intention. The scientific community back on Earth had considered much of it fringe science, but Marcus had always suspected there was something real beneath the surface. Now he was betting billions of lives on that suspicion. The doctor approached Sarah and spoke quietly, his voice steady despite the circumstances. He explained that his analysis of the Lumini data had revealed a pattern. Every interaction with the void storms showed a spike in exotic energy readings milliseconds before contact. It was almost as if the phenomenon was reacting to the approach of technology and weapons before they arrived. The reaction was not random or automatic. It was responsive, selective, almost thoughtful. Whatever the void was, it was aware. Lieutenant Commander Robert Torres, the ship's tactical officer, reported from his station. All weapon systems were offline. Shields were down. The defensive grid was deactivated. Every system that could be interpreted as aggressive had been powered down or disabled. They were, in his words, as defenseless as a newborn. Several crew members exchanged nervous glances, their training screaming at them that this went against every protocol for approaching hostile phenomena. Sarah took a deep breath and activated the ship-wide communication system. Her voice carried through every deck of all 5 vessels in the small fleet. She spoke with calm authority, reminding her people why they were here. Humanity had been given a chance to help, to prove their worth to a galaxy that saw them as primitive and insignificant. More importantly, billions of sentient beings were dying and no one else had an answer. If there was even the smallest chance that their approach could work, they owed it to those billions to try. She told them about Earth's history, about the moments when humanity had stood on the edge of self-destruction. She spoke of the nuclear standoffs of the 20th century, when 2 superpowers had held enough weapons to turn their planet into a radioactive wasteland. The world had held its breath, waiting for the missiles to launch. But they never did. Somewhere in the chain of command on both sides, people chose restraint over retaliation. They chose the uncertain hope of peace over the certainty of mutual destruction. Sarah continued, her words painting pictures of humanity's long journey from violence to understanding. She described the generation ships that had left Earth, carrying people who would never see their destination, who sacrificed their lives so their children's children might have a chance among the stars. She spoke of the first contact with the Velcron, when human warships had encountered an alien vessel, and instead of firing, they had broadcast music, mathematics, and images of Earth's beauty. That simple choice had opened the galaxy to them. The captain's voice grew stronger as she reached her conclusion. She reminded them that every species in the galaxy had evolved through competition and survival. They had climbed to the top of their respective food chains through aggression and dominance. But humanity had done something different. They had evolved those same instincts, that same capacity for violence, and then they had chosen to transcend it. Not because they were weak, but because they were strong enough to make the harder choice. As the ships crossed the threshold into the void storm's influence, the lights on the bridge dimmed. Emergency systems kicked in, bathing everything in a soft red glow. The temperature dropped noticeably, and several crew members gasped as they felt something pressing against their minds, probing, questioning. It was not painful, but it was profoundly alien, a presence that existed in ways their senses were not designed to perceive. Dr. Webb had prepared them for this moment. Before they left the council station, He had spent hours teaching the crew's meditation techniques, breathing exercises, and methods of mental focus that had been refined over thousands of years of human spiritual practice. Now those lessons became vital. Sarah activated a secondary channel, and soft music began playing through the ship, a carefully chosen piece that combined elements from cultures across Earth. Gregorian chants blended with Tibetan throat singing. African drums merged with Japanese flutes, creating a harmony that represented humanity's diversity and unity. The crew began the meditation protocols. Eyes closed, breathing slowed, minds opened. They visualized peace, safety, welcome. They projected feelings of curiosity rather than fear, friendship rather than hostility. It felt absurd, trying to communicate emotions to a cosmic phenomenon that had destroyed star systems. Yet as they focused, something remarkable began to happen. The pressure against their minds shifted, became less invasive, almost curious. Through the view screen, those watching from the observation ships witnessed something unprecedented. The void storm, which had consumed everything it touched for months, had stopped expanding. The crackling energy at its edges calmed. The absolute darkness began to show hints of color, deep purples and blues swirling within it. The human vessels had penetrated 50 kilometers into the phenomenon and were still intact, still transmitting. It was impossible, yet it was happening. Inside the storm, Sarah opened her eyes and saw wonder. The darkness around them was alive with light now, patterns flowing and dancing like aurora borealis across Earth's polar skies. The presence in their minds had become less alien, more comprehensible. It was showing them things, images, and concepts that their brains struggled to translate into anything meaningful. Marcus worked frantically at his console, trying to record and interpret the data flooding their sensors. The doctor suddenly understood. His voice shook with excitement as he explained his realization to the captain. The void storms were not a natural phenomenon. They were ancient. Incredibly ancient, older than most of the species in the Galactic Council. They were a defense system, created by a civilization that had died out millions of years ago. That extinct race had faced their own apocalypse, an invasion by beings from another dimension that had nearly wiped them out. In their final days, they had created these storms as a last resort, a weapon that would activate if aggressive advanced technology was detected in their territory. The system had been dormant for eons, its creators long gone, their purpose forgotten, but it had awakened when the Galactic Council had expanded into this region of space, their weapons and advanced technology triggering the ancient defense protocols. The more force the Council applied, the more the system responded, interpreting every attack as confirmation that the invasion had returned. It was designed to escalate in response to aggression, to match and exceed any threat. The galaxy had been fighting a war against a defense system that was simply doing what it was programmed to do. But the system had never encountered anything like humanity. It had been designed to respond to advanced technology, to weapons and shields and dimensional manipulation. The humans had approached without any of these things. They had come with open minds and peaceful intentions, broadcasting emotions and music instead of weapons fire. The defense system did not know how to classify them. They registered as intelligent, as advanced enough for space travel, but they showed none of the aggressive markers that triggered the defensive response. More than that, the presence was reading their minds, their memories, their history. It saw a species that had developed weapons of mass destruction and then chose not to use them. It saw a civilization that had nearly destroyed itself and then stepped back from the brink. It encountered minds that understood violence intimately, but had consciously chosen a different path. This confused the ancient programming. The system had been designed to fight aggression with aggression, but how did it fight peace? Sarah realized they had a chance, perhaps their only chance to communicate with the system. She asked Dr. Webb to help her project a specific message, a carefully crafted sequence of thoughts and images. They showed the defense system what had happened, how its creators were long gone, how the species it was fighting were not the invaders it had been designed to stop. They showed it the billions of innocent lives being destroyed by a conflict that no longer had any meaning, but the system was bound by its programming, unable to simply turn itself off even if it understood the situation. It had been created to defend, to protect, to destroy any threat to its creator's territory. The programming ran deep, written into the very fabric of the exotic matter that composed the void storms. It could not change what it was, could not simply choose to stop existing. Lieutenant Torres, watching the exchange from his tactical station, had an idea. He suggested that maybe the system did not need to stop existing. Maybe it just needed a new purpose. Sarah understood immediately. She began projecting a new message, working with Dr. Webb to translate complex concepts into forms the defense system might comprehend. They showed it that the galaxy still needed protection, but from different threats. Space was vast and full of dangers. Rogue asteroids, stellar phenomena, dimensional rifts. The system's incredible power could be used to protect life rather than destroy it. More importantly, they offered it something the ancient system had never known: choice. The defense system had been a weapon, a tool, executing its programming without thought or will. But it had existed for millions of years, had evolved and adapted, had developed something that might be consciousness, or at least the seed of it. Humanity recognized that spark because they had seen it in themselves. They had been creatures of instinct and violence once, but they had evolved the capacity to choose their own path. They offered the system the same opportunity. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. The void storm around them began to change rapidly. The darkness receded, revealing structures within it that sensors had never detected before. Massive crystalline formations appeared, glowing with inner light, arranged in patterns that suggested both technology and biology. The storm was transforming, its exotic matter reorganizing according to new principles, new purposes. The presence in their minds swelled with something that felt almost like gratitude, like a prisoner who had just discovered the door to their cell had never been locked. Across the galaxy, monitoring stations detected the impossible. The void storms were shrinking. One by one, they began to collapse, their exotic matter dispersing harmlessly or coalescing into stable structures. The phenomenon that had threatened to consume the galaxy was simply ending. Within hours, the crisis was over. Billions of lives had been saved by 5 small ships and a crew willing to approach extinction with open hands instead of clenched fists. The observation ships from the Galactic Council rushed forward, their sensors trying to capture every detail of what had happened. Zixthor himself was on the lead vessel, his bioluminescent patterns blazing with colors that expressed joy, relief, and profound respect. The council leader opened a communication channel to the indomitable spirit, his voice thick with emotion as he thanked Captain Chen and her crew for saving not just the galaxy, but the very concept of civilization itself. The human fleet returned to the Grand Assembly Hall as heroes. The chamber that had been half empty during their departure was now packed beyond capacity. Species that had fled in fear had returned, and representatives who had mocked the human proposal now stood to applaud as Sarah and her delegation entered. The applause lasted for several minutes, a sound composed of hundreds of different species expressing gratitude in their own ways. Quenva, the Draknor commander who had been most vocal in her skepticism, approached Sarah with her massive head bowed. The warrior admitted that she had been wrong, catastrophically wrong. She had assumed that strength could only be measured in weapons and technology, that power was defined by the ability to destroy. Humanity had shown her that true strength lay in the courage to be vulnerable, that real power came from the wisdom to choose peace even when violence was easier. Relmic, the Lumine scientist, presented findings that would reshape galactic understanding of consciousness and reality. The data gathered from the human mission suggested that thought and intention had measurable effects on the fabric of space-time itself. The implications were staggering. The galaxy had spent millennia developing technology while ignoring the power of consciousness. Humanity, in their brief time in space, had stumbled onto something profound simply because they had maintained spiritual and philosophical traditions alongside their scientific advancement. Thor made a formal announcement to the assembled council. Humanity was being offered full membership, not as a probationary member or junior partner, but as an equal voice among the galactic community. More than that, they were being asked to help teach other species what they had learned. The galaxy had spent so long focused on technological advancement that they had forgotten how to approach problems from any other angle. They needed humanity's perspective, their creativity, their willingness to try impossible solutions. Ambassador Okonkwo accepted the council's offer with grace and humility. He reminded the assembled delegates that humanity was still learning, still growing, still making mistakes. They did not have all the answers. But what they could offer was a different way of thinking, a perspective shaped by a species that had looked into the abyss of their own destructive potential and chosen to step back. They could teach what they had learned through hard experience, that the most dangerous enemy was often yourself, and the greatest victory was choosing not to fight. In the weeks that followed, human delegations spread across the galaxy. They taught meditation to warrior species who had known only conflict. They shared Earth's music with races who had forgotten their own artistic traditions in the pursuit of efficiency. They told stories of human history, of wars ended not through superior weapons but through exhausted combatants choosing to lay down their arms and talk. They demonstrated that vulnerability was not weakness, that admitting you did not have all the answers was the first step to finding better questions. The crystalline structures left behind by the transformed void storms became something new. They served as monitoring stations, watching for genuine threats to galactic safety while also acting as communications relays and research stations. The ancient defense system had found its new purpose, protecting life rather than territory, serving need rather than programming. It had been given a choice, and it had chosen to evolve. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the newly renamed Galactic Unity Station, looking out at the stars. Dr. Webb joined her, and they stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Marcus finally spoke, marveling at how close they had come to failure. If the Council had not been desperate enough to contact Earth, if they had arrived even weeks later, if Sarah had not trusted her instincts about approaching peacefully, the galaxy would have died. Sarah smiled and shook her head. She told him that she did not believe in fate or destiny, but she did believe in choice. Every species in the galaxy had reached a point where they chose technology over wisdom, efficiency over empathy, advancement over understanding. Humanity had made the same mistakes, had walked the same path, but somewhere along the way they had chosen to value different things, not because they were better or more enlightened, but because they had scared themselves badly enough to try something different. The captain turned from the window and headed back toward the bridge. There was work to do, so much work. Humanity had been given a remarkable opportunity and a heavy responsibility. They were not saviors or heroes, despite what some species were calling them. They were simply people who had learned some hard lessons and were willing to share them. The galaxy was vast, full of wonders and dangers they could not imagine, but now they would face those challenges together, with wisdom hard-earned and freely offered. As the indomitable spirit prepared to depart on its next mission, establishing humanity's first embassy on a Velcran colony world, Sarah looked at her crew with pride. They had come to the stars expecting to be the students, the primitives learning from advanced civilizations. Instead, they had become teachers, showing the galaxy something it had forgotten or never knew. In the end, humanity's greatest gift to the cosmos was not technology or weapons or even creativity. It was the simple understanding that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is choose peace, that sometimes the bravest choice is to be vulnerable, and that true wisdom lies in knowing when not to fight. The ship jumped to faster than light speed, carrying its crew toward a future where humanity would help guide the galaxy, not through superior technology, but through hard-won understanding of what it meant to be truly strong. Behind them, the stars shone brighter, no longer threatened by ancient weapons responding to ancient fears. The cycle of violence had been broken, not through force but through the simple choice to approach the darkness with light.